fire or fighting the fire. Emergency stabilization, which is the part of post-fire rehab I'm most familiar with, are emergency actions stabilize and prevent unacceptable resource damage or to minimize threats to life and property. And this is what we call BARE, or Burned Area Emergency Response. And then rehabilitation and restoration are non-emergency restoration of ecosystem structure and replacement of facilities. We used to call BARE Burned Area Emergency Rehabilitation, and the focus over the years has shifted to stabilization, which has a different time frame and a somewhat different interpretation. It's important to keep in mind. Different parts of the agency are responsible for these different types of rehab. The incident commander, we all talk about the IC in the Forest Service, the Fire Service. The incident commander is actually in charge of the efforts for suppression rehab. Suppression rehab is basically restoring fire lines, it's things that happen right after the fire, and it's paid for, most importantly, out of the emergency funds that go into fighting the fire itself. Some examples I already mentioned: fire lines, cut those big dozer lines up the hill slope. You leave them there. It's a source of erosion. It's sometimes a source for trespass into areas where people aren't supposed to be going. So a lot of the suppression rehabilitation is getting those fire lines into a condition where they're not causing a threat to other resources. Hellispots also, if they're temporary, big clearings, they need to be rehabbed and put back into a condition that will regrow the native vegetation. Spike camps or base camps often have to be treated in order to get them back to a healthy condition. And then if roads are disturbed by the firefighting effort, they're usually put back together. Suppression rehab is related to the burned area emergency response in that there's often coordination between the incident commander and the BARE team, which is a team that's put together to assess the need for emergency stabilization. Often the experts the IC folks will call on some of the experts that are on the BARE team to get ideas on how to do some of the rehab. But it's a separate budget item, which is important in the Forest Service. Any additional suppression rehab that's needed after the incident team is gone has to have regional forester approval. Okay, next is the emergency stabilization. And by agency administrator here, usually you're talking about a forest supervisor who's in charge. If it's a multi-forest fire, sometimes the ultimate money manager goes up to the regional forester. Emergency stabilization addresses increased vulnerability and unacceptable risks due to the fire. So these are things that can happen that pose a threat, a risk to somebody due to the change in the environment caused by the vegetation burning off in the wildfire. It deals with immediate preventative actions. So it's very short term. What's going to happen within the next year as a result of having this fire that could pose a risk to people, to property, to resources. The funding is not part of the incident command structure. It's a different, what do we call them, job codes, line item, budget code, all those terms. Most folks here are familiar with that. And the process is that a team is assembled often before the fire is completely contained. They do an assessment of the burned area, look at condition of roads, the condition of vegetation, what's below the fire that increased erosion and increased runoff could affect. One of the biggest consequences of wildfire in steep Southern California chaparral lands, as everybody knows, is increased erosion and runoff. And so an awful lot of the BARE process is focused at analyzing the threat posed by increased runoff and increased sedimentation. So again, just to emphasize, it focuses on the immediate post-fire emergency situation. probably getting the idea here. I'm steering us away from restoring chaparral by emphasizing this because it affects whether any of that money can be spent on actual restoration. So the policy is to identify the imminent post-fire threats, human life and property, critical, natural, and cultural resources. Now, I read that critical natural resources. Well, hey, if we've got chaparral that's burned twice in the last 3 years, couldn't that be a critical natural resource? Well, not necessarily under bear. The assessments are done immediately after the fire. Usually the goal is to get the assessment done within a week or two of containment of the fire. It used to be within a week, it has to be done, or it used to be 3 days, I think. 3 days within containment, you had to have your assessment done. Now, I think we get a week, and if it's a really big fire, you can actually sometimes take 2 weeks. But you gotta do it fast because the goal of BEAR is to put treatments on the ground to stabilize the emergency situation before the threat, which is generally winter rains, hits you. So it's really tough working on fires in the fall where the fire starts in Santa Ana wind at the end of November. When does it start raining? Well, first week in December usually. So there's not a lot of time to do the assessment, prescribe treatments, and then get them out there on the ground in order to protect the critical resources. That's the whole focus of BEAR. Often on large fires, the Forest Service coordinates with other agencies in the whole burned area emergency response assessment process and in coordinating treatments. For example, the Natural Resources Conservation Service can provide funds to private landowners to do rehabilitation treatments or stabilization treatments. Park Service, you're going to hear about from Marty, is also involved in this. Other Department of Interior agencies like the Bureau of Land Management or the Fish and Wildlife Service may have lands in the burned area, also coordinate with the Forest Service, Bureau of Indian Affairs. State water quality control boards are usually very interested